When Professor Winters mockingly challenged the black janitor to solve an impossible calculus equation in front of his elite students, he never expected Marcus Johnson to pick up the chalk and reveal the mathematical genius that had been mopping their floors for 26 years, a moment that would transform not just two men's lives, but the entire culture of Westridge High School. The halls of Westridge High School gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Marcus Johnson, the 58-year-old janitor, methodically pushed his mop across the floor. 26 years he'd been keeping these hallways clean, watching generations of students come and go. Marcus took pride in his work, but few people noticed the man behind the mop, and fewer still knew that beneath his humble blue uniform beat the heart of a mathematical prodigy. Marcus had always loved numbers. As a young man in rural Georgia, he'd devoured every math book he could find at the small local library. But life had dealt him a difficult hand. Family obligations, financial hardships, and the stubborn persistence of prejudice in the 1980s had derailed his college dreams. He'd found work as a janitor, started a family, and put his mathematical aspirations aside. Not entirely, though. He still read advanced math textbooks during his lunch breaks, a private passion hidden from the world. Professor Richard Winters was the opposite of Marcus in nearly every way. At 42, he was the youngest tenured mathematics professor at the local university, and for the past 5 years, he'd been teaching advanced calculus at Westridge as part of an elite program for gifted students. Winters carried himself with the confident air of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. His students feared him. His colleagues respected him, albeit reluctantly. What few people liked about him was his biting sense of humor, which too often came at someone else's expense. It happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. Professor Winters was particularly irritated. None of his students had been able to solve the complex differential equation he'd written on the board, a problem he'd specifically designed to challenge even the brightest minds in his class. "This is disappointing," Winters announced, pacing in front of the chalkboard. "This problem represents the kind of thinking that separates true mathematicians from everyone else. I expected better from this so-called gifted class." Just then, Marcus entered the classroom, mop in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, Professor. Just need to clean up that spill by the door." Winters eyed the janitor, then turned to his class with a smirk. "Perhaps Mr. Johnson here could solve our little problem. What do you say?" He gestured grandly toward the board, prompting nervous laughter from some students. Marcus glanced at the equation but said nothing, continuing his work. That only encouraged Winters. "No, really," the professor insisted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Why don't you give it a try? Unless advanced differential calculus isn't in the janitorial handbook." The classroom fell uncomfortably silent. A few students looked away, embarrassed by their teacher's behavior. Marcus stood still for a moment, his grip tightening on the mop handle. 20 years ago, he might have walked away. But something about the equation on the board, and the smug certainty on Winters' face, made him reconsider. "Actually," Marcus said quietly, setting his mop aside, "I believe I can solve that." The class watched in stunned silence as Marcus approached the board. His hands, weathered by decades of hard work, picked up a piece of chalk with surprising delicacy. For a moment, he simply studied the problem, then began to write. His movements were confident and precise. Symbols and numbers flowed across the board as Marcus worked through the equation with remarkable speed. He didn't just solve the problem. He found an elegant approach that Professor Winters himself hadn't considered. When he finished, he placed the chalk down and stepped back. "I believe that's correct," Marcus said simply. Professor Winters stared at the board, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, reluctant admiration. He checked the work carefully, looking for any mistake to pounce on. There was none. "This is correct," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "In fact, it's a more elegant solution than the one I had in mind." The classroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Marcus, uncomfortable with the attention, nodded politely and returned to his mop. But something had changed in that moment, something that couldn't be undone. Word of what happened spread through Westridge High like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone from the principal to the lunch ladies had heard about the janitor who had outmatched the arrogant Professor Winters at his own game. For Marcus, the sudden attention was uncomfortable. He'd kept his mathematical abilities private for so long that having them exposed felt almost like a violation. Some teachers began treating him differently, with a newfound respect, certainly, but also with an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. Among the students, though, Marcus became something of a legend. Particularly among those who struggled with math, he represented hope, a living reminder that brilliance could exist anywhere, in anyone. Samantha Chen, a sophomore who had been failing calculus despite her best efforts, was the first to approach him directly. "Mr. Johnson," she said hesitantly, finding him cleaning the cafeteria after lunch, "I heard what happened in Professor Winters' class. I'm having trouble with my calculus homework. I've tried everything, but I just can't get it. Do you think, maybe, you could help me?" Marcus looked at the girl's hopeful face and felt something long dormant awakening within him, a passion for teaching that he'd never had the opportunity to explore. That afternoon, Marcus helped Samantha work through her homework in the empty cafeteria. His approach to teaching was nothing like Professor Winters, where the professor demanded brilliance. Marcus cultivated understanding, breaking down complex concepts into digestible pieces. "Math isn't about being smart," he told her. "It's about being persistent, about looking at a problem from different angles until something clicks." The next day, Samantha brought 2 friends. The day after that, there were 6 students waiting for Marcus after school. Within 2 weeks, his impromptu tutoring sessions had grown to include over 20 students, meeting in the library after his shift ended. Principal Diana Ortega couldn't help but notice. After observing one of these sessions from a distance, she called Marcus into her office. "What you're doing with these students is remarkable," she told him. "Their math teachers are reporting significant improvements, especially among students who were struggling before. Professor Winters tells me your understanding of advanced mathematics is exceptional." Marcus shrugged modestly. "I just like helping the kids." "I want to make this official," Principal Ortega continued. "We can set up a formal tutoring program, pay you for your time. These students need someone like you." Not everyone was thrilled with Marcus's new role. Professor Winters, in particular, struggled with the shift in dynamics. The janitor he had mocked was now a colleague of sorts, and worse, one whose teaching methods were yielding results that his own approach had failed to achieve. 3 months into Marcus's tutoring program, Winters confronted him in an empty classroom. "Where did you learn mathematics at this level?" he demanded without preamble. "You never mentioned having a degree." "I don't have one," Marcus replied calmly, continuing to erase the whiteboard. "I'm self-taught. Been studying on my own since I was a teenager." Winters scoffed. "That's impossible. The concepts you're teaching, differential equations, multivariable calculus, these take years of formal education to master." Marcus finally turned to face him. "Maybe for some. For others, all it takes is curiosity and time. I've had plenty of both. Why work as a janitor then? Why waste your talent?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus considered it before answering. "I never saw it as waste," he said finally. "Life takes unexpected turns. I needed steady work to support my family. But I never stopped learning, never stopped loving the beauty of mathematics. That's something you and I have in common, Professor." Winters looked away, confronted by a truth he hadn't expected, that he and the janitor might share something fundamental despite their different paths. As winter gave way to spring at Westridge High, the impact of Marcus Johnson's tutoring program had become impossible to ignore. What had begun as an impromptu session with a single struggling student had blossomed into something extraordinary, a phenomenon that was reshaping the school's relationship with mathematics from the ground up. The transformation wasn't just evident in rising test scores or improved grades. It manifested in the changing attitudes of students who had once viewed math as an insurmountable obstacle, but now approached it with newfound confidence and even enthusiasm. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoon, the school library transformed into a vibrant hub of mathematical exploration. Students from all grades and ability levels gathered around tables where Marcus, still dressed in his janitorial uniform after completing his regular duties, guided them through the intricacies of everything from basic algebra to multivariable calculus. Unlike the rigid hierarchy of a traditional classroom, Marcus's sessions operated with a beautiful fluidity. Advanced students often helped beginners, creating an organic community of learning that transcended the usual social boundaries of high school. What made Marcus's approach so effective wasn't just his profound understanding of mathematical principles, though that certainly played a part. It was his ability to connect with students who had been written off by the educational system, to recognize and nurture potential that others had missed. He had an uncanny talent for identifying each student's unique stumbling blocks and tailoring his explanations accordingly. Where Professor Winters saw failures, Marcus saw different types of thinkers who simply needed alternative pathways to understanding. Math isn't a test of intelligence, he often told his students, especially those who came to him believing themselves bad at math based on years of discouragement. It's a language with its own grammar and vocabulary. Anyone can learn to speak it fluently with the right guidance and enough practice. By mid-April, the program had grown to include over 40 regular attendees, with another 20 dropping in occasionally for specific help. Principal Ortega had arranged for Marcus to receive modest compensation for his tutoring hours, though he would have continued regardless. For him, the real reward came in moments like watching Samantha Chen, his first student, confidently explaining logarithmic functions to a group of freshmen, or seeing Jeremy Wilson, a senior who had failed algebra twice, solve a complex equation with quiet determination. The school's math teachers began to notice dramatic improvements in classroom performance. Students who had once sat silently in the back now raised their hands to answer questions. Homework completion rates increased substantially, and test scores reflected a deeper conceptual understanding rather than mere memorization of formulas. Even more remarkably, enrollment requests for advanced math courses for the following academic year had increased by nearly 30%, an unprecedented surge of interest. Professor Winters observed these changes with conflicted emotions. His professional pride made it difficult to acknowledge that the janitor's informal tutoring was succeeding where his own prestigious methods had fallen short. Yet he was a mathematician at heart, and the evidence was becoming undeniable. Against his initial inclination, he found himself occasionally lingering at the edges of the library during Marcus's sessions, observing the methodology that generated such remarkable results. On a particularly warm Tuesday in late April, Winters had a breakthrough of his own. He had been watching Marcus work with a group of struggling juniors on a particularly challenging concept in precalculus. Instead of presenting the standard approach, Marcus drew an unexpected real-world analogy involving basketball trajectories that suddenly illuminated the abstract principle. The students' faces lit up with understanding, and Winters found himself experiencing an uncomfortable epiphany. He had been teaching mathematics as a gatekeeper, using it to identify the truly gifted, rather than as a universal language that could be made accessible to all with the right translation. The local impact of Marcus's program might have remained contained to Westridge High if not for Maria Gonzalez, the school's media specialist who had been providing the library space for the tutoring sessions. Impressed by what she witnessed day after day, Maria reached out to her brother-in-law, a reporter for the Westridge Chronicle. Initially skeptical about the newsworthiness of a janitor teaching math, he agreed to observe a session as a courtesy to his sister-in-law. What he witnessed transformed his skepticism into journalistic interest. The resulting feature, The Janitor Mathematician of Westridge High, Hidden Genius Transforms Students' Lives, appeared on the front page of the Sunday edition, complete with photographs of Marcus at the whiteboard surrounded by attentive students. The article detailed his remarkable self-education, his decades of quiet mathematical study during lunch breaks and evenings, and the transformative effect his tutoring had on students who had previously struggled. It highlighted several success stories, including Samantha Chen's journey from failing calculus to becoming one of the school's top mathematics students, and Jeremy Wilson's plan to study engineering after previously having no college aspirations at all. The story struck a chord that extended far beyond Westridge. Within days, it was picked up by regional news outlets, then national education blogs, each iteration amplifying the compelling narrative of undiscovered brilliance and second chances. Marcus, deeply private by nature, found the sudden attention disorienting. He had never sought recognition for his mathematical abilities, having long ago accepted that his life had taken a different path. The spotlight now thrust upon him felt foreign and somewhat uncomfortable, yet he recognized that his story was resonating with people in ways he hadn't anticipated. Letters and emails poured into Westridge High from across the country, from former students who had abandoned educational dreams due to discouragement, from teachers inspired to reconsider their approaches to struggling students, from janitors and service workers who had hidden talents and aspirations of their own. Principal Ortega created a special folder to collect these messages, occasionally sharing particularly moving ones with Marcus during their weekly check-ins about the tutoring program. Among the many responses to the article was one that would prove particularly consequential. Dr. Eleanor Washington, chair of the mathematics department at State University, had read the piece with professional interest. With 30 years in mathematics education, she had developed a particular passion for addressing systemic barriers that prevented talented individuals from underrepresented backgrounds from entering the field. Marcus's story epitomized the very issue she had dedicated much of her career to addressing. On a Wednesday morning in early May, Marcus was surprised to find Dr. Washington observing his tutoring session from the back of the library. Distinguished in appearance with her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, she watched intently as he guided a group of seniors through probability theory. At the session's conclusion, she approached him with evident admiration. "Mr. Johnson," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Eleanor Washington from State University's mathematics department. I hope you don't mind my unexpected visit, but after reading about your program, I wanted to see it for myself." Marcus shook her hand, feeling somewhat self-conscious in his work uniform. "Not at all, Dr. Washington, though I should clarify that I don't have formal qualifications." "Qualifications take many forms," she replied with a warm smile. "What I've observed today demonstrates pedagogical intuition that many FIDs in my department would envy. Your ability to translate abstract concepts into accessible language is remarkable." Their conversation continued for nearly an hour after the students had departed, ranging from Marcus's self-education journey to his philosophical approach to mathematics education. Dr. Washington was particularly struck by his humility. Despite his evident brilliance, he spoke of mathematics with reverence rather than mastery, as a lifelong pursuit rather than a conquered territory. Before leaving, she asked pointed questions about his background. What circumstances had prevented his formal education, how he had sustained his mathematical studies despite working full-time, what mathematical texts had most influenced his thinking. Marcus answered honestly, revealing the complex interplay of financial necessity, family obligations, and subtle but persistent racial barriers that had shaped his path. Dr. Washington listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. 2 weeks later, a formal letter arrived at Marcus's modest home on the east side of Westridge. Inside was an unprecedented offer, a position as a special lecturer in the university's mathematics department, with the opportunity to simultaneously complete his own undergraduate and graduate degrees. The position would provide a salary comparable to his current one, along with benefits and a flexible schedule that would allow him to continue his tutoring program at Westridge on a reduced basis. The letter represented everything Marcus had once dreamed of, but had long ago filed away as impossible. Formal recognition of his mathematical abilities, the chance to teach at a university level, the opportunity to finally complete his education, After decades of resignation to a different life path, the possibility of this dramatic change left him momentarily overwhelmed. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the university's offer spread before him as Maria, his wife of 35 years, placed a steaming cup of coffee by his hand. She had always known about his mathematical gift, had witnessed his quiet dedication to learning even as he worked long hours to support their family. She had seen him reading advanced textbooks by lamplight after exhausting days, solving complex problems in notebooks he kept carefully organized on a special shelf in their bedroom. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly, taking the chair opposite him. Marcus shook his head slowly, still processing. "I'm thinking about all the years, all the paths not taken. I'm 58 years old, Maria. Most people are planning retirement at my age, not starting new careers." Maria reached across the table to take his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, hands that had worked hard their entire lives, that had cleaned floors and fixed leaky pipes, and turned pages of mathematics books with equal care. "You've spent your whole life putting others first," she said. "You postponed your dreams to support our family, to put Robert and Amelia through college. Maybe this is life's way of coming full circle. Maybe it's finally your turn." Marcus looked at his wife's face, at the wisdom and strength reflected there. They had built a good life together despite modest means, had raised 2 children who had opportunities they themselves had never had. There was profound satisfaction in that accomplishment. Yet the prospect of finally pursuing his deepest intellectual passion, of sharing his love of mathematics in a formal academic setting, stirred something long dormant within him. Not ambition exactly, but purpose. "What about the students at Westridge?" he asked, giving voice to his main hesitation. "Some of them are just starting to believe in themselves." "The letter says you can continue the tutoring program," Maria reminded him. "Besides, you've already changed the culture there. You've shown them what's possible. That legacy will continue even if you're only there twice a week instead of 5 days." As they talked into the night, weighing practical considerations against dreams deferred, Marcus felt a growing clarity. Throughout his life, he had made peace with the path circumstances had dictated, finding joy in small mathematical discoveries made in private moments. Never had he imagined that at this stage of life, new doors would open, that his private passion could become a public contribution, that his self-taught knowledge would be deemed valuable by the very institutions that had once seemed inaccessible. By morning, his decision was made. He would accept the university position while maintaining his connection to Westridge. It wouldn't be easy. He would be navigating unfamiliar academic waters while completing his own formal education. But the challenge energized rather than intimidated him. Mathematics had always been his refuge. Now it would become his legacy. News of Marcus's appointment spread quickly through Westridge High, generating a mix of reactions that reflected the complex social ecosystem of the school. For the students in his tutoring program, there was pride tinged with concern about his reduced presence. For most faculty members, there was genuine happiness for a colleague whose brilliance had gone unrecognized for too long. For Principal Ortega, there was satisfaction in seeing talent properly valued, even as she contemplated the challenge of replacing his full-time janitorial position. And for Professor Winters, the news prompted a profound reckoning. The man he had once mockingly challenged as a joke was now joining the ranks of university educators, not through the traditional pathways Winters himself had followed, but through sheer intellectual force and an exceptional gift for teaching. The realization forced him to confront uncomfortable questions about merit, opportunity, and his own assumptions about where intellectual excellence might be found. The final weeks of the school year at Westridge High took on a bittersweet quality for Marcus Johnson. Each familiar routine, unlocking the maintenance closet in the early morning hours, greeting the first arriving teachers, checking the building systems before students arrived, now carried the weight of impending change. While he would continue his connection with the school through his tutoring program, his daily presence as the ever-reliable custodian would soon become a memory. For a man who had found stability and purpose in consistency for over 2 decades, the prospect of such transformation stirred complex emotions beneath his typically calm exterior. Principal Ortega had arranged for a special assembly during the final week of classes, ostensibly to celebrate the academic achievements of the year. Marcus had agreed to her plan with some reluctance. He had never sought the spotlight and found the growing attention to his mathematical abilities somewhat discomforting. Yet he also recognized that his story had come to represent something larger than himself, something that resonated deeply within the school community and beyond. His journey had become a powerful metaphor for hidden potential and second chances, themes that Principal Ortega believed deserved formal acknowledgement. The day before the assembly, Marcus spent his lunch break sitting alone in the school's courtyard. A worn copy of Bertrand Russell's Introduction to Mathematical Philosophy open on his lap, the same book he had been reading when Professor Winters had first noticed him months earlier. The mathematical text remained unread as Marcus's thoughts drifted through memories of his years at Westridge. The thousands of classroom floors he had cleaned, the countless minor repairs he had completed, the generations of students he had quietly observed growing from awkward freshmen to confident graduates. There was profound dignity in this work, he reflected, in maintaining spaces where young minds could develop and flourish. His janitorial role had never been merely a compromise with circumstance, but a contribution with its own intrinsic value. Yet mathematics had always been his deepest intellectual passion, a private universe of elegant patterns and profound truths that had sustained him through life's disappointments and limitations. The university position represented the convergence of this lifelong love with formal recognition, an alignment of inner calling with outward opportunity that he had long ago stopped expecting. At 58, when many of his peers were contemplating retirement, Marcus found himself on the threshold of an entirely new chapter, one that both exhilarated and intimidated him. That evening, he visited Samantha Chen's home at her parents' invitation. The modest apartment was filled with the aroma of a celebratory dinner prepared in his honor. Samantha's parents, first-generation immigrants who had worked tirelessly to provide opportunities for their daughter, understood perhaps better than most the significance of Marcus's journey. Over a carefully prepared meal, they expressed their profound gratitude for his influence on their daughter, who had transformed from a student failing calculus to one now preparing for advanced placement exams with confidence. "Before you, Mr. Johnson," Samantha would cry over her math homework, Mrs. Chen confided, her voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't help her. Our English is still not so good, and the mathematics here is taught differently than in our country." She began to believe she was not smart enough. "Now she explains mathematics to us," Mr. Chen added with quiet pride. "She talks about angles and functions at dinner like poetry." Samantha, usually reserved, spoke with uncharacteristic passion about her plans to study mathematics in college. Dreams catalyzed by Marcus's influence. "You showed me that understanding doesn't always come in straight lines," she told him. "Sometimes we have to circle around a concept, approach it from different directions, before it makes sense. That changed everything for me." As he drove home that night, Marcus reflected on the ripple effects of unexpected connections, how his mathematical knowledge, kept private for so many years, had become a bridge for this young woman to discover her own capabilities. How many other Samanthas might be out there, he wondered, their potential obscured by circumstance or lack of the right guidance. Perhaps this was the true value of the university position, not as personal validation, but as a platform to reach more students who needed alternative pathways to mathematical understanding. The morning of the assembly arrived with clear skies and uncharacteristic warmth for late May. Marcus performed his usual opening duties with methodical care, then changed from his work uniform into the one dress shirt and tie he kept in his maintenance office locker for special occasions. The garments, rarely worn, felt stiff and formal against his skin, an external reminder of his impending transition from the familiar to the unknown. By 10 o'clock, the entire student body and faculty had gathered in the gymnasium. Marcus sat awkwardly on the stage alongside Principal Ortega. several school board members, and somewhat surprisingly, Professor Winters. The professor had changed noticeably over the past months. The cutting edge of his arrogance had softened, and he now observed Marcus with what appeared to be genuine, if still somewhat reluctant, respect. Principal Ortega approached the podium, the gymnasium falling into attentive silence as she adjusted the microphone. Her voice, confident and clear, carried to the farthest bleachers. Education is about discovering potential in ourselves and in others, she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled students. This year, we were reminded that brilliance doesn't always announce itself with credentials or titles. Sometimes it works quietly among us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She continued with a brief recounting of what had transpired in Professor Winters' classroom months earlier, careful to frame the incident not as an embarrassment to the professor, but as a moment of unexpected revelation. She spoke of the tutoring program that had blossomed from that single interaction, of improved test scores and renewed confidence among students who had previously struggled, of a cultural shift within Westridge that had made mathematics more accessible to all. Today, she announced, we gather not only to celebrate these achievements, but to share some news. Mr. Johnson has accepted a position at State University, where he will serve as his special lecturer in the mathematics department, while completing his own formal education. The gymnasium erupted in spontaneous applause. Students in the front rows, many of them participants in Marcus's tutoring program, rose to their feet, prompting a rippling standing ovation that spread throughout the space. Marcus sat still amid the celebration, moved by the genuine enthusiasm, but also acutely aware of the weight of expectations now placed upon him. Success at the university level was far from guaranteed. He would be entering a world of academic conventions and hierarchies entirely foreign to his experience. When invited to speak, Marcus approached the podium with characteristic humility. The applause continued for several moments before he raised his hand slightly, encouraging quiet. I'm not much for public speaking, he began, his deep voice steady despite his discomfort with the attention. For most of my 26 years at Westridge, I've been happiest working in the background, making sure classrooms and hallways are ready for the real business of education. That work has always been meaningful to me, and I've never seen it as less important than teaching. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Mathematics has been a private joy for most of my life, something I pursued in quiet moments for the pure pleasure of understanding. I never expected that personal interest to become anything more, but life sometimes presents unexpected opportunities when we least anticipate them. Marcus looked out at the sea of young faces before him, suddenly struck by how many individual stories of struggle and potential they represented. What I've learned through the tutoring program is that understanding comes in different forms for different minds. There's no single path to mathematical thinking, just as there's no single path to a meaningful life. Sometimes the most unexpected routes lead to the most important destinations. He concluded by announcing that he would continue his tutoring program at Westridge 2 afternoons each week during the coming academic year, a commitment that elicited another round of enthusiastic applause. As he returned to his seat, Principal Ortega presented him with a plaque commemorating his years of service to the school, a tangible acknowledgement of his contributions beyond the mathematical brilliance that had recently defined him in the public eye. After the assembly, as students filtered back to their classrooms, Professor Winters approached Marcus in the emptying gymnasium. For a moment, the two men stood in awkward silence, their relationship transformed by the events of the past months in ways neither could have anticipated. Winters extended his hand first. I misjudged you, he said, the admission clearly difficult for the proud academic. And I was wrong about something else too. True mathematics isn't about separating the gifted from everyone else. It's about opening doors that many believe are closed to them. You've taught me that. Marcus accepted the handshake, recognizing the significance of this gesture from a man whose academic arrogance had once seemed impenetrable. We're not so different, you and I, he responded thoughtfully. We both found refuge in numbers. Maybe now we can help others find the same. The professor nodded, a tentative smile replacing his typically stern expression. "The university will be better for having you, though I suspect you'll challenge some deeply held assumptions there, just as you have here." As the day progressed, Marcus found himself the recipient of unexpected farewells. Cards from students, handshakes from faculty members who had barely acknowledged him before the revelation of his mathematical abilities, a tearful hug from the cafeteria manager who had shared early morning coffee with him for 15 years. These gestures underscored the bittersweet nature of transitions, the necessity of leaving something behind in order to move forward. After completing his final maintenance rounds, Marcus stood alone in the empty main hallway as afternoon sunlight streamed through the high windows. He ran his hand along the polished surface of a nearby locker, appreciating the quiet dignity of well-maintained spaces. Tomorrow he would return as usual to complete the school year, but the familiar routines now carried the poignancy of impending conclusion. The decision to accept the university position, to step into an entirely new professional identity at an age when most people were settling into the familiar, required a particular kind of courage, not the dramatic bravery of a single moment, but the quieter fortitude of embracing uncertainty after decades of routine. Yet as he moved through the hallway that had been under his care for so many years, Marcus felt a growing sense of peace about his choice. His mathematical gift, kept private for so long, had become a bridge, not just for his own delayed dreams, but for students who needed different approaches to learning, for a school community rethinking its assumptions about intelligence and potential, and perhaps even for Professor Winters, whose own relationship with mathematics was being transformed through this unexpected encounter. As Marcus switched off the hallway lights and locked the main entrance behind him, he realized that his decision represented more than a personal career change. It symbolized the ongoing human capacity for growth and reinvention at any stage of life, the possibility that talents long hidden might still find expression in ways that benefit not only the individual but the larger community. In this sense, his journey from janitor to university lecturer was less about personal advancement than about expanding the circle of possibility for others who might follow unexpected paths of their own. That evening, as he shared dinner with Maria, they spoke not of the past opportunities missed, but of the future ones now opening before them. There would be challenges ahead. The academic world would present its own forms of resistance and difficulty, but they would face them together, as they had weathered the disappointments and celebrations of almost 4 decades of partnership. "I'm proud of you," Maria told him, her eyes bright with unused tears. "Not just for this opportunity, but for how you've handled everything. The attention, the recognition, the changes. You've stayed true to yourself through all of it." Marcus covered her hand with his own, thinking of the many silent sacrifices she had made to support his mathematical studies over the years. The evenings she had protected his reading time, the encouragement she had offered when work and family responsibilities had nearly overwhelmed his intellectual pursuits, her unwavering belief in capacities that the outside world had failed to recognize. "None of this would have been possible without you," he replied with simple sincerity. "Every step of the way, you've helped me keep that part of myself alive, even when there seemed no practical purpose for it." As darkness fell outside their modest home, Marcus and Maria continued their conversation, not just about the university position and what it would entail, but about the larger meaning of this unexpected turn in their lives. Neither could have predicted that a moment of public humiliation would ultimately lead to such profound opportunity, that a lifetime of private passion would find expression in ways that might shape the futures of countless students. In the end, Marcus's decision represented faith in the value of knowledge pursued for its own sake, in the power of unexpected second chances, and in the possibility that brilliance might emerge from unlikely sources when given the proper conditions to flourish. These were the principles that would guide his new chapter at the university, even as they had quietly shaped his decades at Westridge High. Principles that transcended job titles and social expectations to affirm the enduring human capacity for growth, contribution, and transformation at any stage of life. 5 years later, Dr. Marcus Johnson stood at the front of a packed university lecture hall. introducing the fundamentals of calculus to a new class of freshmen. On his desk sat a small framed photograph of him in his janitor's uniform, a reminder of where he'd started and of all the unlikely turns life can take. In the back of the classroom, a young woman watched with pride. Samantha Chen, now a mathematics major herself, had been inspired by the janitor who had shown her that mathematics wasn't beyond her grasp. And she wasn't alone. Throughout the university and beyond, Marcus's story had inspired countless others to reconsider their own potential and the hidden talents of those around them. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one challenge, one opportunity to change not only a life but an entire community. For Marcus Johnson, that moment came when a professor asked him, mockingly, to solve an equation. Little did anyone know that simple act would unleash a legacy of learning that would continue for generations to come.